I spent 40 years spotting microscopic cracks in concrete before bridges collapsed. Yet I missed the lethal fracture in my own family. At 7 in the morning, a federal agent gripped my arm at airport security. "Pretend I am arresting you," he whispered. "Do not look back." I froze. I thought I was boarding a flight for a family vacation. I had no idea I was actually escaping an execution planned by the two people standing right behind me. My name is James Smith, and at 65 years old I have spent my entire adult life waiting for things to fall down. As a former structural risk assessor for the Apex Meridian Group, my job was to look at a pristine, gleaming skyscraper and see only the microscopic fractures in the concrete, the fatigue in the steel, and the inevitable pull of gravity waiting to drag it all into the dust. I was paid to be paranoid. I was paid to predict the collapse before the first brick ever hit the ground. Yet, as I stood in the security line at Denver International Airport on that crisp Tuesday morning, I failed to see the catastrophic structural failure looming right over my shoulder. The Yepesen Terminal is an engineering marvel, a tensile fabric roof structure that mimics the snow-capped peaks of the Colorado Rockies. Most travelers just see a white tent, but I saw the intricate dance of tension and compression. I found myself staring up at the fiberglass peaks, mentally calculating the load distribution of the steel cables holding the canopy against the weight of the winter snow. It was a habit I could not shake. I was analyzing the tensile strength of a roof while completely ignoring the tension in my own family. "Dad, you are staring at the ceiling again," Olivia said, her voice soft and teasing. She reached out and adjusted the wool scarf around my neck. "We do not want you tripping before we even get to the gate." I looked down at my daughter. At 32, Olivia still had the same wide, eager eyes she had when Martha and I adopted her from the foster care system 2 decades ago. She had grown into a beautiful woman, but in my eyes, she was still the little girl who used to hold the flashlight for me while I inspected the foundation of our old house. "Just admiring the engineering, Livy," I said, patting her hand. "The tensile integrity of this place is fascinating. It is designed to move with the wind, not fight it." "Well, try to move with a line, okay," Mark chimed in from behind me. My son-in-law stepped forward, flashing that charming salesman smile that had won Olivia over 5 years ago. Mark was 35, handsome in a sharp, modern way, but he always seemed to vibrate with a nervous energy I could never quite place. Today, however, he looked the picture of a devoted son-in-law. "Here, Dad," Mark said, thrusting a bottle of premium mineral water into my hand. "You need to finish this before we get to the scanners. You know how dry the air is in the cabin. With your heart condition, hydration is non-negotiable." I took the bottle, feeling the cold condensation against my palm. I did feel tired. A heavy, dull fatigue had been settling in my bones for weeks, which my doctor had attributed to a mild cardiac arrhythmia. It was nothing life-threatening, he had said, just a sign of age. "I am not thirsty, Mark," I said, trying to hand it back. "Please, James," Mark insisted, pushing the bottle back toward me. His grip was firm. "For Olivia. She worries about you. We all do. Just drink it down. It will help with the altitude in Aspen." I looked at Olivia. She nodded encouragingly, her eyes filled with what looked like genuine concern. "Please, Dad. Mark is right. We want you healthy for the trip. You promised us you would take care of yourself." I sighed and unscrewed the cap. It was easier to drink the water than to argue. I took a long swallow, the liquid cool and refreshing against my dry throat. Mark watched me, his gaze intense, tracking the movement of my Adam's apple. At the time, I thought it was care. Now, looking back, it felt like a scientist observing a lab rat running a maze. "Good man," Mark said, clapping me on the shoulder as I finished the bottle and tossed it into a recycling bin. "Now, let's get you through security so we can relax in the lounge." The line shuffled forward. The chaos of the airport was a dull roar around us, the clatter of plastic trays, the beep of scanners, the drone of announcements. I felt a sudden wave of dizziness, likely from chugging the water too fast, but I shook it off. I needed to be strong for this trip. This vacation to the secluded lodge in Aspen was supposed to be a bonding experience, a chance to reconnect after Martha passed away last year. I stepped up to the body scanner, raising my arms as the machine whirred around me. I stepped out, expecting the usual wave from the TSA agent. Instead, the officer frowned at his screen and held up a hand. "Sir, step over here, please," he said. "Is there a problem?" I asked, patting my pockets. I removed my belt and my watch. "Just a random screening, sir. Right this way." I glanced back at Olivia and Mark. They were already through the metal detector, gathering their bags. They looked at me with confusion. Mark pointed at his watch, mouthing something about the time. I gave them a reassuring wave and followed the TSA officer to a secondary screening area. That was when the atmosphere shifted. A man in a dark tailored suit stepped out from behind a partition. He did not look like airport security. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach drop. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. I started to reach for my wallet to show my ID. "Officer, my name is James Smith. I am a retired structural engineer. I think there has been a—" I never finished the sentence. The man in the suit reached out and grabbed my left arm. It was not a polite guide. It was a vice grip. His fingers dug into my bicep with bruising force, freezing me in place. He leaned in close, invading my personal space. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and see the red veins in his eyes. He looked terrified, not of me, but for me. "Pretend I am arresting you," he whispered. The words were barely a breath, but they hit me like a physical blow. I blinked, my brain struggling to process the command. "Excuse me." "Do not turn around," he hissed, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with urgency. "Do not make a scene. Do not look at your family. Act like I am taking you into custody. Your life depends on it. You have seconds, Mr. Smith. Seconds." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the terminal faded into a buzzing static. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that had nothing to do with my medical condition. I looked at the man's face. This was not a prank. There was a desperate seriousness in his steel-gray eyes that I had seen before. I had seen it in the faces of foremen when a support beam started to buckle. It was the look of imminent disaster. "Nod if you understand," he commanded softly. I nodded slowly, my neck stiff. "Good. Now, look angry. Look confused, but come with me." He twisted my arm behind my back. It was not painful, but it looked aggressive. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. As the cold metal clicked around my wrists, the reality of the situation crashed into me. I was being arrested. Or at least I was playing the part. "Hey, what are you doing?" Mark's voice rang out from the security checkpoint. I flinched instinctively, wanting to turn around to explain, to reassure my children. But the agent's grip tightened, a silent reminder of his order. "Keep walking," the agent whispered. "Head down." "That is my father-in-law," Mark shouted. I could hear the theatrics in his voice, now a performance designed for the surrounding crowd. "He is an old man. He has a heart condition. You cannot just manhandle him like that." "Sir, stay back!" Another TSA officer barked at Mark. Dad, look at me!" Olivia screamed. Her voice cracked with panic. "What is happening, Mark? Do something!" The sounds of their distress tore at me. Every instinct as a father screamed at me to fight the agent, to run back to my little girl and tell her it was a mistake. But the engineer in me, the cold, calculating part of my brain that dealt in physics and facts, was beginning to wake up. Why was the agent shaking? Why did he say my life depended on it? I let the agent push me forward. We moved quickly away from the checkpoint, cutting through the flow of travelers. People stopped and stared. I saw a mother pull her child closer as I passed. To them, I was a criminal, a threat. "What is going on?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Who are you?" "My name is Agent Miller," he replied, not breaking his stride. "And right now I am the only reason you are going to survive the next hour." We marched down a long, sterile corridor reserved for airport personnel. The sounds of Mark and Olivia screaming faded behind us, swallowed by the distance. As we walked, my mind began to race, analyzing the data points of the last 10 minutes. Mark's insistence on the water, the way he checked his watch, the specific mention of my heart condition loudly for everyone to hear, Olivia's perfect practiced concern, and now the FBI pulling me out of the line. I thought about the bridges I had inspected over my 40-year career. A bridge does not just collapse out of nowhere. There are always signs: microfractures, rust bleeding through paint, concrete spalling. Signs that are ignored because people assume the structure is sound, just because it has always been standing. I had assumed my family was sound. I had assumed the foundation of love and loyalty was solid. But as I walked in handcuffs down that gray hallway, the cracks began to appear in my memory. The money Mark had asked for last month. The hushed phone calls Olivia ended whenever I entered the room. The way they looked at me when they thought I was sleeping, not with love, but with calculation. "In here," Agent Miller said, steering me toward a nondescript metal door. He swiped a key card, and the mechanism clicked open. He shoved me inside gently but firmly. It was a small interrogation room. A metal table, 3 chairs, no windows. The air was stagnant and smelled of industrial cleaner. Miller followed me in. He reached out and unlocked the handcuffs, the metal clattering onto the table. Then he turned and locked the heavy door behind us. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. I stood there, rubbing my wrists, feeling the blood rush back into my hands. I was alone in a windowless box with a federal agent, while my daughter and son-in-law were out there presumably terrified for my safety. Or were they? The question hung in the silence, heavy and suffocating. The door had closed, sealing me off from the terminal, from the vacation, and from the people I loved. But as I looked at Agent Miller's grim expression, I realized the door had not locked me in. It had locked them out. And for the first time in 65 years, I realized that the people I should have been most afraid of were not strangers in the dark, but the ones holding my hand in the light. The room was a vacuum. The industrial hum of the airport ventilation system was the only sound, a low drone that seemed to vibrate against the metal table where my hands rested. The silence here was heavy, pressing against my eardrums with more force than the screaming engines of a jet plane. It was the silence of a tomb. Agent Miller sat opposite me. Up close, under the harsh fluorescent strip lighting, he looked exhausted. The adrenaline that had propelled him through the terminal had settled into a grim, professional resolve. He placed a heavy black tablet on the table between us, the screen facing down. "My name is Agent Miller," he said, his voice level and devoid of the theatrical urgency he had used in the terminal. "I work with the Organized Crime Unit, specifically financial fraud and racketeering." I rubbed my wrists where the handcuffs had been. The phantom sensation of the metal bit into my skin. "Organized crime," I repeated the words, feeling foreign in my mouth. "I spent 40 years calculating load variances for skyscrapers, Agent Miller. The only crime I have ever committed was a speeding ticket in 1985. "We are not investigating you, Mr. Smith," Miller said. He tapped the back of the tablet. "We are investigating the people who bought your ticket." He flipped the tablet over. The screen flickered to life, displaying a high-definition monochrome feed. The timestamp in the top right corner read 0930 hours, 20 minutes ago. The location stamp read Gate of 14 check-in area. It was a window into the immediate past. I saw myself on the screen, looking slightly pixelated but unmistakably weary. I was standing next to our carry-on luggage. Olivia was there smiling, that bright, infectious smile that had charmed her way into student council, into her university sorority, and eventually, I thought, into my heart. Mark was standing behind me, patting my back. "Watch closely," Miller instructed. On the screen, my pixelated self checked a wristwatch, and pointed toward the restrooms. I remembered that moment. I had needed to wash my face to splash some cold water on my skin to fight off the dizziness. As soon as the on-screen James Smith turned his back and walked out of the frame, the atmosphere in the video shifted so violently, it felt like a jump cut in a horror movie. I watched mesmerized and horrified as Olivia's face transformed. The smile did not fade, gradually. It was simply deleted. Her facial muscles went slack, then tightened into a mask of cold, bored indifference. Her posture slumped. She pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen, not with the casual demeanor of a daughter waiting for her father, but with the sharp, agitated movements of a project manager behind schedule. It was a small detail, a shift in body language that anyone else might have missed. But I had spent a lifetime studying stress fractures. I knew that when a support beam begins to fail, it does not scream, it just stops holding up the weight. Olivia had stopped holding up the pretense of love the second I was gone. "Focus on the bag," Miller said. Mark was the focal point now. He looked around his head, swiveling left, then right, checking the flow of passengers. It was a calculated scan. Once he was satisfied that no one was paying attention to a man adjusting his luggage, he reached for my leather satchel. He did not unzip the main compartment where I kept my wallet and passport. He went straight for the side pocket. He knew exactly where it was. My breath caught in my throat. "That is my medication," I whispered. "He is getting my heart medication." "Watch his hands," Miller commanded. Mark pulled out the orange prescription bottle. I knew that bottle intimately. It contained my daily dose of beta blockers, small blue pills that kept my heart rhythm steady. On the screen, Mark unscrewed the cap. He dumped the contents into his left palm. Then, with a motion so fluid it spoke of hours of practice, his right hand dipped into his own jacket pocket. He pulled out a handful of identical blue pills. He dropped the new pills into my bottle and shoved the original ones into his pocket. He screwed the cap back on, gave the bottle a little shake, and slid it back into my satchel. The entire operation took less than 6 seconds. "He is fast," I murmured, my engineer's brain appreciating the efficiency, even as my heart began to shatter. That was not a nervous fumble. That was a procedure. "He practiced," Miller confirmed. "We have surveillance of him doing the same motion in his car 3 days ago. He wanted to make sure he could do it under 10 seconds. Miller paused the video. He zoomed in on the floor near Mark's foot. A single, small blue pill lay on the gray carpet, dropped during the transfer. "He was fast, but he was sloppy," Miller said. "He dropped one. After you and your family moved toward the gate, our field team moved in and recovered that pill." Miller reached into his jacket and pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a single blue tablet. It looked exactly like the medication I had taken every morning for the last 5 years. "Our mobile lab analyzed this 10 minutes ago," Miller said, his voice dropping to a grave register. "It is not a beta blocker, Mr. Smith. It is potassium chloride. High concentration." The air left the room. Potassium chloride. I knew what that was. In construction, we dealt with chemistry for concrete mixtures and soil stabilization, but I read enough to know what that chemical did to the human body. It was the third drug used in lethal injection protocols. It stops the heart. "It interferes with the electrical signals of the myocardium," I said, my voice sounding distant like it was coming from someone else. "It causes cardiac arrest." "Instantaneously," Miller said. "At that concentration, once it hit your bloodstream, you would have been dead before the plane reached cruising altitude." And here is the kicker to a medical examiner. Without a specific toxicology request, it just looks like a massive heart attack. Given your age and your medical history, no one would have questioned it. You would have died of natural causes at 30,000 feet. I stared at the freeze frame on the tablet. Mark's hand was hovering over my bag. Olivia was looking at her phone, indifferent to the fact that her husband was loading a weapon to kill her father. My chest tightened a phantom pain that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the breaking of a bond I thought was unbreakable. "Why?" I asked. The word was barely a whisper. Miller swiped the screen, bringing up a new set of documents. They were scanned blueprints and financial spreadsheets. "Do you recognize the Apex Meridian Group?" Miller asked. "That is my old firm," I said. "I retired 2 years ago." "Mark did not retire," Miller said. "He has been running a side operation using your old credentials. He has been approving structural safety certifications for construction projects that do not exist. Ghost buildings. He creates the project, gets the loan from the bank based on the safety assessment, launders the money through a shell company, and then claims the project was canceled." I leaned in, squinting at the documents. I saw my signature at the bottom of a risk assessment for a commercial complex in Nevada. A complex I had never seen. A signature I had never written. "He forged my signature," I said, anger beginning to mix with the grief. "He is using my reputation to steal from banks." "It is worse than that," Miller said. "He got greedy. He borrowed money from the wrong people to leverage these loans. A cartel operating out of Las Vegas. They are not banks, Mr. Smith. They do not send letters when you miss a payment. They send cleaners." Miller pointed to a figure on the spreadsheet. "Mark owes them $2 million. The project fell through because the EPA flagged the site. The money is gone. The cartel wants their principal back, plus interest by the end of the month." "And I am the insurance policy," I realized. The logic clicked into place like a steel beam settling onto a rivet. "My life insurance, my estate." "You are worth $5 million in liquid assets and property," Miller said. "And you are the only person who can verify that those signatures are forgeries. If you are alive, Mark goes to prison for fraud, and the cartel kills him for losing their money. If you die of a heart attack this weekend, Olivia inherits everything. They pay off the cartel, they keep the rest, and nobody looks at the forged documents because the expert witness is dead." I sat back in the metal chair, feeling the cold seep through my shirt. It was a perfect, elegant structural design. The load path was clear. The failure point was identified. I was the structural weakness in their lives. I was the redundancy they needed to eliminate to keep their own house from collapsing. I thought about the last 20 years. I thought about the day I walked into the orphanage and saw a scared 12-year-old girl sitting alone in the corner. I remembered the way she held my hand the day Martha died, promising me that we would always be a family, that she would never let me be lonely. I had built my life around that promise. I had constructed a fortress of safety for her. I paid for her college. I paid for her wedding. I gave Mark a job recommendation. I had poured concrete and steel into the foundation of their lives, believing that if I built it strong enough, they would be safe. But I had built it on quicksand. "The girl," I started, then corrected myself. "Olivia. Did she know?" Miller looked at me with a pity that was harder to bear than the fear. "Mr. Smith, look at the video again." He hit play. I watched Mark finish the swap. He zipped the bag. He tapped Olivia on the shoulder and whispered something. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't look shocked. She simply nodded, put her phone away, and then, in a transformation that made my blood run cold, she turned her face toward the hallway where I would return, and she composed her features back into the loving, concerned daughter. She practiced the smile. She adjusted her hair. She checked her reflection in the glass of the boarding gate. She was not an accessory. She was the architect. "She knew," I said, my voice cracking. "She knew he was swapping the pills. She was the lookout." "We have audio from the car ride to the airport," Miller said softly. "She told him to make sure he did it before security, so you would take the pill on the plane. She said she did not want you to suffer, so it had to be quick." "She did not want me to suffer," I repeated, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. How thoughtful of her. She plotted to stop my heart, but she wanted to make sure it was efficient. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. These hands had held Olivia when she cried over a broken heart in high school. These hands had walked her down the aisle to give her away to the man who was now trying to murder me. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and stinging. It was not a tear of sadness. It was the condensation of a cooling soul. The James Smith who had walked into this airport, the loving father, the grieving widower, the trusting old man died in that room. He was crushed under the weight of the evidence. What remained was the structural risk assessor, the man who looked for cracks, the man who knew that when a building is condemned, you do not try to save it. You evacuate the premises, and you bring it down before it kills anyone else. So, I said, wiping the tear away with a steady hand. I looked up at Agent Miller. The trembling stopped. My eyes felt dry and sharp. You have the video. You have the pill. Why are we talking? Go arrest them. Miller shook his head. We can arrest them for attempted murder, yes. But Mark's lawyer will argue he just mixed up his own medication with yours. They will say it was a mistake. Without a confession, without absolute proof of intent, they could walk in 5 years. And the cartel. The cartel will still be out there. We need the network, Mr. Smith. And to get the network and to put your daughter and son-in-law away for life, we need more than a dropped pill. You need them to finish the job, I said. No, Miller said firmly. We need them to admit they are doing the job. We need a recorded confession, or an overt act that cannot be explained away as an accident. He leaned forward. I can put you in protective custody right now. We disappear you. You live out your days in a safe house in Arizona. You never see them again. I looked at the screen one last time. I looked at the monsters wearing the faces of my children. No, I said. I am not running away. I spent my life ensuring things stand up. I am going to make sure this collapses exactly the way it should. What are you saying, James? I am saying I need to get on that plane, I said, my voice cold, devoid of the fatherly warmth that had defined me for decades. If they want a heart attack, let's give them some stress. Miller looked at me, assessing my structural integrity. He must have seen that the cracks were gone, replaced by reinforced steel. It is a risk, he said. A high risk. Calculated risk, I corrected him. That is my profession, Agent Miller. Now tell me, how do we catch them without me actually dying? If we arrest them right now, Agent Miller said, leaning back in his metal chair, we have enough for conspiracy charges. We have the video. We have the toxicology report. It is a solid case, Mr. Smith. It is a cosmetic repair on a foundational crack, I snapped the engineer in me, overriding the victim. I stood up and paced the small length of the interrogation room. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but the rhythm had changed. It was no longer the erratic flutter of panic. It was the steady driving piston of an engine under heavy load. You said it yourself, Miller. A good lawyer will argue circumstantial evidence. They will say Mark has a prescription pill problem and mixed up the bottles by accident. They will say Olivia was just checking her email, not signaling a hit. They will plead it down to involuntary manslaughter or reckless endangerment. They will be out in 3 years, and I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder until the cartel sends a professional to finish what my amateur children started. I stopped pacing and slammed my hand down on the table. The metal rang out a sharp, decisive sound. I do not want a plea bargain, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. I want a demolition. I want the entire structure brought down to the ground so that nothing can ever be built on it again. I want a confession. Miller looked at me, assessing my stability. He saw the shift. The trembling old man was gone. In his place stood the project manager, who had overseen the construction of suspension bridges in high wind zones. I was used to high stakes. I was used to calculating the exact moment a structure would fail. To get a confession, Miller said slowly, you have to put yourself back in the kill zone. You have to get on that plane. You have to go to that isolated lodge in the middle of a blizzard with two people who have already decided you are worth more dead than alive. It is not a controlled environment, James. It is a burning building." "Then let me walk into the fire," I replied, "because I need to find the source of the ignition." Miller held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. He reached into a sleek aluminum case on the floor and pulled out a small, translucent patch, no larger than a dime. "This is not a wire in the traditional sense," Miller explained, peeling off the backing. "Sit down. I am going to place this behind your ear right against the mastoid bone. It uses bone conduction technology to pick up audio. It is skin-colored and textured. Unless they are scrubbing behind your ears, they will not see it." I sat down. Miller's hands were cold as he pressed the device onto my skin. It felt like a small piece of tape, barely noticeable. "It transmits in real time to our localized receiver," Miller continued. "But here is the catch. The range is limited. We will have a team on the plane and a team in Aspen, but the mountains are a nightmare for signal propagation. If you go too deep into the valley, or if a storm hits, which is forecast for tonight, we might lose the audio feed." He knelt down and instructed me to take off my left shoe. He slipped a thin, flexible insole underneath the original lining. "GPS tracker," he said. "This has a stronger signal. It pings off low-orbit satellites. Even if we cannot hear you, we will know where you are. But James, listen to me closely." He grabbed my ankle before I could put the shoe back on, forcing me to look at him. "Aspen is not Denver. It is wild country. There are dead zones. If you get into trouble in a signal shadow, you are on your own, until we can triangulate your position. Response time could be 10 minutes. It could be 30. "I understand the tolerances," I said, lacing my shoe back up. "I know the safety margins." "Do not play hero," Miller warned. "Your objective is not to fight them. It is to get them to talk. Get Mark to admit he swapped the pills. Get Olivia to admit she knows about the debt. Once you have the verbal confirmation, you give the code phrase, 'The foundation is settling,' and we breach. Do not wait for them to try again. If they try again, they might succeed." I stood up and adjusted my jacket. I checked my reflection in the darkened glass of the observation window. I looked the same as I had 20 minutes ago, a silver-haired, well-dressed retiree ready for a vacation. But the eyes were different. The eyes were cold. "I am ready," I said. Miller unlocked the door. "One last thing. Why risk it? Most men would take the protective custody." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. A memory flashed through my mind, sharp and painful as a shard of glass. It was from 3 years ago, a summer barbecue in our backyard. Martha was still alive then, though the cancer was already quietly eating away at her. I was at the grill, flipping burgers, and I looked over to see Mark standing on the patio staring at the house. He wasn't looking at the garden Martha had planted. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was looking at the roofline, the copper gutters, the imported stone facade. Martha had walked up to me, her voice barely a whisper. "He is not admiring our home, James," she had said. "He is appraising it. He measures our rooms in square footage, not memories. Be careful with him. He is a load-bearing wall made of plaster." I had laughed it off. I told her she was being cynical. I told her Mark was just ambitious. "My wife warned me," I told Miller, my voice thick with regret. "She saw the cracks in the foundation years ago. I was too arrogant to listen. I thought I could engineer my way out of any problem. I thought money could reinforce any relationship. I owe it to her memory to fix this. I cannot leave this structure standing when I know it is rotten to the core." I pushed the door open and stepped back into the sterile brightness of the airport corridor. The walk back to the security checkpoint felt like a march to the gallows, but I was the executioner, not the condemned. Every step was a calculation. I had to shed the skin of the structural risk assessor and put on the mask of the doting, confused father. I had to lower my defenses to lure them in. As I rounded the corner back to the seating area, I saw them. They were standing exactly where I had left them near the entrance to the concourse. To the casual observer, they looked like a worried couple waiting for news. Olivia was pacing, wringing her hands. Mark was talking on his phone, his free hand, chopping the air aggressively. As soon as they saw me, the performance began. "Dad!" Olivia shrieked, sprinting toward me. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. "Oh my God, are you okay? We were so scared they took you away and would not tell us anything." I stood stiffly for a microsecond before forcing my arms to come up and hug her back. It felt like hugging a mannequin wired with explosives. I could smell her expensive perfume Chanel, a gift I had bought her for Christmas. Now it smelled like formaldehyde. "I am fine, Livy, I am fine," I said, patting her back with a trembling hand that I hoped conveyed frailty rather than rage. Mark hung up his phone and approached his eyes, scanning me with the precision of a laser scanner. He was not looking for injuries. He was looking for signs of compromise. He was checking to see if I had been broken or if I had turned. "What the hell happened, James?" Mark demanded, feigning outrage. "I was about to call our lawyer. Did they hurt you? Why did they handcuff you?" I pulled away from Olivia and looked at Mark. I let my shoulders slump. I made my hands shake visibly. "It was a mistake," I stammered. "A terrible bureaucratic mix-up. Apparently there was a flag on my tax returns from 1998. Some automated system flagged a discrepancy in an offshore investment I never made. Identity theft, maybe. They thought I was fleeing the country." I watched Mark's face closely. I saw the tension in his jaw release. The logic held. It explained the FBI. It explained the urgency. And most importantly, it had nothing to do with him, the pills, or the cartel. "Tax returns." Mark let out a scoffing laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Unbelievable! The federal government at its finest. They harass a 65-year-old man over a clerical error from 30 years ago." "They apologized," I said, rubbing my wrists. "They cleared it up once they ran my social security number through the main database. But it shook me up, Mark. I have never been handcuffed before." "Of course it did, Dad," Olivia said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "It is traumatic. Maybe we should cancel the trip. Maybe we should go home." It was a test. I knew it was a test. If I agreed to go home, I would be safe, but they would know something was wrong. Why would a man who just wanted to relax cancel a trip over a tax misunderstanding? "No," I said, firmly, straightening my posture just enough to show resolve but keeping the fragility in my voice. "No. I need this vacation. I need to get away from this noise. If I go home now, I will just sit in my office and worry about taxes. I want to see the mountains. I want fresh air. I want to be with my family." I looked Mark dead in the eye. "I want to trust that everything is going to be okay." Mark smiled. It was the smile of a predator who realizes the trapdoor is still open. "That is the spirit, James," he said. "We will get you a stiff drink on the plane. You need to relax." "Let's go," I said. They expedited me through security as an apology. "We can go straight to the gate." We walked toward the tram that would take us to Concourse C. I walked between them. To anyone watching, we were a loving family, recovering from a stressful incident. But in my head, I was visualizing the blueprints of the scenario. I was the load. They were the failed supports. We boarded the plane 20 minutes later. It was a regional jet, small and cramped despite being first class. I took the window seat. Olivia sat in the aisle. Mark sat across from us. "Here you go, Mr. Smith," the flight attendant said, placing a fresh bottle of water on my tray table. "Your son-in-law asked me to make sure you stayed hydrated." I stared at the bottle. It was sealed, but the image of Mark swapping the pills burned in my retina. The bottle was not just water. It was a symbol. It was a reminder that every mundane object in my life, my food, my drink, my medicine, my car, could now be weaponized against me. "Thanks," I muttered. You should take your pill now, Dad, Olivia said softly, leaning in. You missed your morning dose because of all that drama with the FBI. You do not want your heart to get out of rhythm. Her voice was so sweet, so caring. It was the voice she used when she asked for tuition money, or a down payment on a house, or a signature on a loan. I reached into my bag. My hand brushed against the cold plastic of the evidence bag Miller had given me, the decoy bottle filled with harmless sugar pills. I knew I had to make the switch. I had to perform the magic trick right in front of their eyes. You are right, I said. I feel a little flutter. I pulled out the bottle, the real bottle, the one Mark had tampered with. I held it in my hand. Mark was watching me over the top of his in-flight magazine. His eyes were locked on the orange plastic. He was waiting for the show. He was waiting for the collapse. I feigned a cough, dropping the bottle into my lap for a split second. In that shadow, hidden by the tray table, I swapped it with the decoy bottle palmed in my other hand. It was a move I had practiced in the interrogation room 5 times under Miller's supervision. I brought the decoy bottle up. I unscrewed the cap. I shook 2 pills into my hand. Here is to a relaxing trip, I said, my voice dry. I popped the pills into my mouth and chased them with the water. Mark watched my throat swallow. I saw a micro-expression flash across his face, a mixture of anticipation and terrifying finality. He checked his watch. He was starting the countdown. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes. Wake me up when we land, I whispered. We will, Dad, Olivia said, patting my arm. Rest now. You have earned it. I sat there in the darkness of my own eyelids, listening to the roar of the engines. I was trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet with 2 people waiting for me to die. But they did not know one thing. They thought they were watching a demolition. They did not realize they were sitting on a landmine, and I had just armed the trigger. The pressurized cabin of a Bombardier CRJ-700 is not designed for privacy. Even in the first-class section, which consisted of only 3 rows, the air felt thick and recycled, carrying the scent of warmed nuts and the metallic tang of anxiety. I sat by the window, my shoulder pressed against the cool plastic of the cabin wall, looking out at the endless blanket of clouds that separated us from the earth below. We were cruising at 34,000 feet a height, where the air outside was thin enough to kill a man in seconds. Inside the plane, the atmosphere was just as lethal. I kept my eyes half closed, feigning a doze, but my senses were dialed up to maximum sensitivity. I was no longer a passenger. I was a structural monitor embedded in concrete, listening for the groans of shifting tectonic plates. Across the narrow aisle, Mark was pretending to read a business journal, but he had not turned a page in 20 minutes. His leg was bouncing a rapid, rhythmic tapping of his heel against the carpeted floor that sent a subtle vibration through the seat frame. It was the frequency of impatience. He was waiting for a reaction. He was waiting for the potassium chloride to stop the electrical signals in my heart. In the seat directly in front of me, Olivia was hunched over her phone. The cabin lights were dimmed, but the blue glow of her screen illuminated her face in the reflection of the window. She was typing furiously. I watched her thumbs move with jagged, aggressive speed. She held the phone close to her chest, shielding the screen from any wandering eyes, specifically mine. She was not texting a friend. She was likely updating the creditors or perhaps checking the weather report for a funeral. I closed my eyes fully and let the numbers drift through my mind. $20 million. That was the sum total of my life's work. It was the liquid cash in my investment accounts, the equity in the properties in Atlanta and Savannah, and the diversified portfolio of bonds I had accumulated over 40 years of climbing scaffolding and arguing with architects. $20 million. To me, it was security. It was the ability to sleep at night, knowing I would never be a burden to anyone. To Mark and Olivia, it was not security. It was a scoreboard. It was a solution to a problem they had created with their own greed. Dad, Mark's voice cut through the drone of the engines. It was soft, probing. I opened my eyes, slowly affecting the grogginess of a man waking from a nap. "Yes, Mark. Are we there yet?" "Not yet. About an hour to go," Mark said, leaning across the aisle. The magazine lay forgotten on his lap. "I was just thinking. Since we have some downtime and you are feeling a bit fragile after the airport incident, maybe we should talk about the future." "The future?" I asked, rubbing my chest, as if soothing a mild ache. I saw Mark's eyes dart to my hand. He looked hungry. "The business continuity," Mark said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, with the Apex Meridian Group legacy and the family trust. Olivia and I were talking, and we are worried about the administrative burden on you. You saw what happened with the FBI today. Stress is the silent killer, James." "It is," I agreed, the double meaning hanging in the air between us like smoke. "I think it would be smart," Mark continued, emboldened by my passivity, "if we signed that power of attorney for the charitable foundation. Just the operational side. It would allow me to handle the disbursements and the tax filings while you enjoy your retirement. You would not have to worry about signing checks or reviewing audits. I could take that weight off your shoulders." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had looked me in the eye on his wedding day and promised to cherish my daughter. Now, he was asking for the keys to a charitable fund worth $5 million, so he could likely drain it to pay off a cartel in Las Vegas. The engineer in me wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I had seen the forged documents, that I knew about the ghost projects in Nevada. But the strategist in me, the man who had learned to negotiate with corrupt contractors and corner-cutting developers, knew that to trap a rat, you have to leave the cheese out. "You make a good point, Mark," I said, my voice sounding weary and defeated. "I am getting old. Today proved that. I did not even have the energy to argue with that agent." Mark nodded eagerly. "Exactly. You need to preserve your strength." "Maybe you are right," I sighed, looking out the window again. "Maybe it is time I let go of the reins. When we get back to Atlanta, have the lawyers draw up the papers. I will sign over the operational control of the foundation to you." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the seat in front of me. Olivia had stopped typing. She had heard me. Mark's face lit up with a mixture of relief and triumph that was nauseating to witness. He had just secured his golden parachute. Or so he thought. "That is a wise decision, James," Mark said, his voice trembling slightly. "You won't regret it. We just want what is best for you." "I know you do," I said. The flight attendant appeared with the meal cart, breaking the tension. "Dinner service, gentlemen. We have a cold roast beef salad or the pasta." "I will take the salad," Mark said quickly. "And another scotch." "Just water for me," I said. "And the pasta." "Make sure he drinks the water," Olivia chimed in, turning around in her seat. Her face was composed, but her eyes were hard. "Dad, did you take your pills? I did not see you take them earlier." I paused. In my pocket, the plastic evidence bag Miller had given me felt heavy. I had already performed the swap in my mind a dozen times, but doing it, under the gaze of two people watching for my death, was a different class of pressure. "I took them right after takeoff," I lied, patting my pocket. "But you know, I think I might have dropped one. I should take another just to be safe. My rhythm feels a little off." I saw Mark and Olivia exchange a glance. This was better than they hoped. An overdose. Or just confirmation that the poison was in my system. I reached into my bag, shielding the motion with the fold of the white linen napkin the flight attendant had placed on my tray table. My fingers found the prescription bottle, the real one, the lethal one. I palmed it. In the same motion, I slid the decoy bottle from my pocket into my palm. It was a sleight of hand I had never needed in the world of structural engineering, but survival is a quick teacher. I brought the decoy bottle up to the light. It looked identical. The orange plastic, the white cap, my name typed on the label. "Better safe than sorry," I muttered. I popped the cap. I shook 2 pills into my hand. They were white sugar pills pressed to look exactly like my beta blockers. I put them in my mouth. Mark stopped breathing. He was staring at my throat. Olivia was gripping the headrest of her seat, her knuckles white. They were watching an execution. They were the firing squad, and I was the prisoner blindfolding himself. I swallowed. I picked up the glass of water and drank deep, washing the harmless sugar down. "There," I said, setting the glass down. "That should settle it." I leaned back and closed my eyes again. Now began the hardest part of the performance: the weight. According to Miller, the concentration of potassium chloride Mark had used would cause cardiac arrest within 15 to 20 minutes of ingestion. It would start with nausea, then muscle weakness, then a sudden catastrophic electrical failure of the heart. I counted the minutes in my head. 5 minutes passed. The flight attendant cleared the trays. 10 minutes. Mark finished his scotch and ordered another. He was checking his watch every 30 seconds now. 15 minutes. I let out a soft groan and rubbed my left arm. "Dad," Olivia asked instantly, "are you okay?" "Just a little indigestion," I whispered, keeping my eyes closed. "Chest feels a bit heavy." "Just breathe, James," Mark said. His voice was tight. "Just relax. Let the medicine do its work." 20 minutes. By now I should be gasping for air. My heart should be seizing. The panic on the plane should be starting. Mark should be calling for a doctor, playing the grieving son-in-law, while knowing it was too late. But nothing happened. I continued to breathe evenly. I did not convulse. I did not clutch my chest in agony. I simply sat there, a 65-year-old man digesting a pasta dinner and 2 sugar pills. 30 minutes passed. The silence from across the aisle was changing texture. It was shifting from anticipation to confusion, and then to a creeping dread. I opened one eye, just a crack. Mark was staring at me. His brow was furrowed. He looked at the empty water bottle, then at me, then back at the bottle. He was running the calculations in his head. Did he use enough? Did the heat degrade the chemical? Was I immune? "You look remarkably well, James," Mark said. The disappointment in his tone was so thick, I could almost taste it. "I do feel a bit better," I said, sitting up straighter and stretching my arms. "I think the pills finally kicked in. That dizziness is gone. Actually, I feel quite energized." I turned and smiled at him. It was a genuine smile because I was enjoying his terror. "It must be the mountain air," I said cheerfully. "I cannot wait to get to the lodge. I think I might even go for a hike tomorrow." Mark went pale. He looked at Olivia. She looked back at him, her eyes wide with a silent question. "What did you do wrong?" They were beginning to panic. A plan that relies on a precise structural failure is terrifying when the structure refuses to fall. They had no plan B for a victim who simply refused to die. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We are beginning our final descent into Aspen. The weather is a bit rough down there with heavy snow and some turbulence, so please fasten your seatbelts and secure your tray tables." I looked out the window. The clouds had broken, revealing jagged peaks of the Rockies, rising up like the teeth of a trap. The world below was white and gray, hostile and unforgiving. "Looks like a storm," I said to Mark. "Yeah," Mark muttered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. A storm. He did not know the half of it. The real storm was sitting in seat 1A, and it was just getting started. As the plane banked sharply to the left, descending into the valley of the shadow of death, I tightened my seatbelt. I was walking into their kill zone, yes, but I was bringing the detonator with me. The drive from the airfield into the heart of the Rocky Mountains was a slow, suffocating ascent into whiteness. We were in a rented heavy-duty SUV with Mark behind the wheel, driving with an aggression that made the vehicle shudder as it tore through the fresh powder accumulating on the asphalt. The storm the pilot had warned us about had descended with the weight of a collapsing glacier. Outside my window, the towering pines were reduced to ghostly silhouettes, bowing under the burden of the snow. I watched the signal bars on my phone screen flicker and die. One bar, then searching, then nothing. "Looks like we are off the grid," Mark announced, glancing at the dashboard display. His voice held a note of satisfaction that made the hair on my arms stand up. Miller was right about the coverage. No cell service past the tree line. "Perfect," Olivia murmured from the back seat. "No emails, no calls, just peace." Peace. That was a word they kept using. It sounded less like tranquility and more like the final silence of a grave. I adjusted the collar of my coat, feeling the small, hard lump of the bone conduction device behind my ear. Agent Miller had warned me that the signal would be spotty, but he had assured me that the GPS tracker in my shoe used a different frequency, pinging off satellites rather than cell towers. Somewhere out there, 5 miles down the valley in a ranger station buried in snow, Miller and his tactical team were watching a blinking dot on a screen. They were my only lifeline. If that dot stopped moving, or if it plummeted 200 feet vertically, they would know. But knowing and saving were two very different engineering concepts. The lodge appeared out of the blizzard like a fortress of timber and glass. It was an architectural marvel, I had to admit. The structure was built into the side of a sheer cliff face, designed with a cantilevered living room that extended out over the void. From a structural risk perspective, it was a nightmare of load-bearing calculations. The entire weight of the main deck relied on steel beams, anchored into the granite rock. If those anchors corroded, or if the rock face sheared, the house would not just slide, it would fall into the abyss. "It is called the Pinnacle," Mark said as he killed the engine. The silence that followed was instant and oppressive. "I rented the whole place. No staff, no concierge, just us family." "No staff?" I asked, stepping out of the car into the biting wind. The cold hit me like a physical slap, freezing the moisture in my nostrils instantly. "That seems like a lot of work for a vacation, Mark. Who is going to cook? Who is going to clean?" "We are," Olivia said, climbing out and shivering in her designer fur coat. "We wanted privacy, Dad. We did not want strangers hovering around while we bond." I looked at the house. The windows were dark, reflecting the swirling snow like dead eyes. They did not want strangers because strangers have eyes and ears. Strangers are witnesses. By removing the staff, they had removed the variables. It was just me, 2 predators, and 1,000 acres of frozen wilderness. We hauled our bags inside. The interior was freezing until Mark got the massive stone fireplace roaring. The great room was dominated by a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the cliff edge. In the daylight, the view would have been breathtaking. Now, in the storm, it was just a black void swirling with white flakes. Standing near the glass, I felt the subtle vibration of the wind battering the structure. The floor hummed beneath my feet. The house was alive, fighting the elements just as I was. "This place is dramatic," I said, tapping the glass with a knuckle. "Triple-paned, reinforced. But look at the truss work there. If the snow load on the roof exceeds 50 pounds per square foot, you will hear the timber start to groan." Mark ignored my assessment. He was busy at the wet bar uncorking a bottle of dark red wine. The pop of the cork echoed in the cavernous room. 1996 Cabernet, Mark said, pouring 3 large glasses. "Cost me a fortune, but this occasion calls for the best. To family." He brought the glasses over to the leather seating area, where Olivia and I had settled. He held one out to me. The liquid was dark, opaque. It could hide anything. Powder, liquid sedative, another dose of potassium chloride. I looked at the glass. I looked at Mark's hand. It was steady, but his jaw was clenched tight. "I think I will pass, Mark," I said, leaning back. "My stomach is still a little unsettled from the flight. And with the medication change, alcohol might not be wise." Mark froze. The glass hovered in the air between us. "It is just one glass, James," he said, his smile tight and strained. "It helps with the circulation. It will warm you up." "No," I said firmly. "I will stick to water. Bottled water. Which I will get myself." Mark's face darkened. The veneer of the polite son-in-law cracked. He slammed the wine glass down onto the heavy oak coffee table. The stem snapped with a sharp crack, and red wine exploded across the surface like a blood spatter. "God damn it, James!" Mark roared. The sudden violence of the outburst made Olivia jump. "Why do you have to be so difficult? We are trying to do something nice for you. We bring you to this incredible place. We buy this expensive wine, and you treat us like we are poisoning you." The irony hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Mark, calm down," Olivia said, but her voice lacked warmth. She was looking at me, her eyes narrowing. She was analyzing my refusal. Was I just being a stubborn old man, or did I suspect something? Dad is right. He needs to be careful with his heart. She stood up and began wiping the spilled wine with a napkin. Her movements were mechanical. She did not look at Mark with concern. She looked at him with annoyance, like a manager dealing with an incompetent employee. "I am going to my room," I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy, not from age, but from the sheer weight of the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I am tired. The altitude is getting to me." "Dinner is in an hour," Mark muttered, turning his back to me to stare into the fire. "Do not lock yourself away all night." "I just need to rest," I said. I navigated the hallway to the guest suite Mark had assigned me. It was at the far end of the lodge, isolated from the master suite where they would be staying. As soon as I entered the room, I closed the door and locked it. It was a simple privacy lock, a small brass pin that popped into the handle. It would not stop a determined shoulder, let alone a man fueled by desperation and debt. I grabbed a heavy oak chair from the writing desk and wedged it under the doorknob. It was a primitive fortification, but it added a layer of resistance. Then I went to work. I scanned the room with my engineer's eyes. The room was spacious with heavy timber beams and another large window overlooking the drop. I walked to the window and tried the latch. It moved, but the window would not budge. I pushed harder, applying leverage against the frame. Nothing. I peered closely at the seal. There was no ice buildup on the interior. I ran my fingernail along the seam. It felt sticky. Fresh varnish, or glue. I looked outside. The ledge below the window was non-existent. It was a sheer drop. If I went out this window, I would fall into the darkness. But if someone wanted to come in... No, that was impossible. The threat was inside the house. But why was the window stuck? Had Mark jammed it to prevent me from crying for help? Or to prevent me from escaping if they decided to set the place on fire? Paranoia is a structural flaw in the human mind. But tonight, it was a survival mechanism. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The wind howled outside, a constant mournful shriek that masked the sounds within the lodge. I touched the device behind my ear. "Miller," I whispered, barely moving my lips. "I am in the room. They are agitated. Mark is losing his temper. I refuse the wine. I am secure for now." There was no response, just the static of the storm. I hoped the bone conduction was transmitting even if I could not hear them. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed. I kept my shoes on. I reached for the heavy wooden walking stick I had found in the umbrella stand by the front door and brought it into the room with me. I gripped it in my right hand, hiding it beneath the thick down comforter. Time stretched. The luminous hands of my watch moved with agonizing slowness. 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I heard a knock at the door. "Dad?" It was Olivia. "Dinner is ready. We made steaks." "I am not hungry, Livy," I called out, feigning a groggy voice. "I took a sleeping pill. I am just going to sleep through until morning." "You have to eat," she insisted. The doorknob jiggled. Then it turned. The door opened an inch before hitting the back of the chair I had wedged under the handle. "Dad," her voice sharpened. "Why is the door blocked?" I tripped over the chair, I lied, keeping my voice slurred. Just leave it. I am already in bed. Good night. There was a silence on the other side of the door. A heavy, pregnant silence. I could hear breathing. Then a low murmur. Mark was there too. They were whispering. Leave him, I heard Mark say, his voice muffled by the wood. If he took a sleeping pill, it is better. We can do it while he is out. My blood ran cold. Do it while he is out. The doorknob released. Footsteps retreated down the hall, the heavy timber floorboards creaking under their weight. I did not sleep. I lay there in the darkness staring at the ceiling beams. I analyzed the joinery. Mortise and tenon. Strong. Reliable. Unlike the bond between a father and his children. Around 2 a.m, the storm intensified. The wind buffeted the lodge, making the timbers groan. But underneath the wind, I heard it. Creak. Creak. Someone was in the hallway. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. They were trying to match the rhythm of the wind, moving only when the house shuddered, masking their approach. But I knew the load path of this floor. I knew that the third board from the door had a slight warp. I had felt it with my foot when I entered. Squeak. They were right outside. I gripped the walking stick until my knuckles turned white. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and rhythmic, mimicking the deep sleep of the medicated. The doorknob turned again. Slowly. So slowly that the brass mechanism barely clicked. The door pressed against the chair. I watched in the gloom as a thin slice of light from the hallway cut across the floor. The chair groaned under the pressure. They were pushing. I tensed, ready to spring up, ready to swing the heavy wood at my own son-in-law. I calculated the arc. I would aim for the knee or the wrist, disabling blows. The pressure on the door increased. The chair leg scraped an inch across the floorboards. Then, abruptly, the pressure stopped. "It is jammed tight," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. "He must have wedged it good." "Is there another way?" Olivia's voice. Cold, impatient. "The balcony," Mark whispered. "The sliding door in the living room connects to the wraparound deck. It passes his window. It is icy out there, Mark. It is dangerous." "You want the money or not?" The sliver of light vanished. The door clicked shut. I sat up, my eyes darting to the window. The window I couldn't open. The window that looked out over the abyss. They were going out onto the deck in a blizzard. They were going to try to come in through the window. Or perhaps they were going to break the glass and make it look like an intruder or a confused old man who fell out. I slipped off the bed, clutching the stick. I moved to the window and pressed my back against the wall next to the heavy curtains. I waited. 5 minutes later, I saw the beam of a flashlight cut through the swirling snow outside the glass. A dark shape moved along the narrow railing of the deck. It was Mark. He was inching along the precipice, buffeted by the wind, risking his life to take mine. He reached the window. He shone the light inside. The beam swept across the empty bed. He paused. He pressed his face against the glass, his features distorted by the cold and the condensation. He looked like a gargoyle. I held my breath. If he broke the glass, the noise would be deafening. But it would also let the cold in. It would destroy the sanctuary. Mark raised a gloved hand. He held a heavy metal tool, a tire iron. He was going to break in. I raised my stick, preparing to smash the glass from the inside the moment he struck, to surprise him, to knock him off the ledge. It was simple physics, action and reaction. But then the wind gusted with hurricane force. The lodge shuddered violently. Mark lost his footing on the icy railing. His arms flailed. He dropped the tire iron. It clattered silently into the abyss below. Mark grabbed the window frame, his face a mask of sheer terror, as he dangled over the drop for a split second before hauling himself back onto the deck. He did not try again. He scrambled back toward the living room, defeated by the very elements he had hoped would hide his crime. I sank to the floor, my back sliding down the wall. They were desperate. They were clumsy. And they were running out of time. Tomorrow they would not wait for nightfall. Tomorrow they would get direct. The sun rose over the Rockies like a bruise, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of purple and sickly yellow. I had not slept. I had spent the remaining hours of the night sitting in the armchair facing the door, my hand resting on the walking stick, listening to the wind die down. The storm had broken, leaving behind a silence so absolute, it felt heavy, pressing against the glass of the lodge, like the weight of the ocean. When I finally unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway at 7 in the morning, the air in the lodge was frigid. The fire in the great room had burned down to gray ash. Mark was standing by the sliding glass doors, the same ones he had tried to use to access my window hours earlier. He was staring out at the white expanse, his posture rigid, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and found the abyss staring back with an invoice in its hand. "Morning," I said, my voice deliberately loud in the cavernous space. Mark jumped. He spun around, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked terrible. Dark circles hung under his eyes like bruises, and a layer of stubble darkened his jaw. The stress was eating him alive, eroding his facade faster than rust on cheap steel. "James," he stammered, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. You are up early." "Old habits," I said, walking to the kitchen island. "I thought I smelled coffee." "Yeah, I just made a pot." Mark moved away from the window, his movements jerky. "Listen, James. I am glad you are up. I need your help with something, outside." I paused, the mug halfway to my lips. "Outside? It is 5 degrees below zero, Mark." I know," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "But I think there is a leak. The gas line that feeds the outdoor fire pit, I smelled rotten eggs when I went out to check the deck earlier. It is strong, James. I am worried the storm might have ruptured a seal. Can you come take a look? You are the expert on infrastructure." I looked at him over the rim of my mug. It was such a clumsy, amateurish trap that it was almost insulting. He wanted to get me outside away from the house, perhaps near the edge, where the snow was slippery, and a 65-year-old man could tragically lose his footing while inspecting a pipe. "A gas leak?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Yes. It smells dangerous. I do not want to wake Olivia until we are sure." I took a slow sip of the coffee. It was bitter and lukewarm. "Mark," I said, setting the mug down with a deliberate clink on the granite counter. "This lodge was built less than 5 years ago. I checked the specs on the rental listing before we came. It uses a high-pressure propane system with solenoid safety valves." Mark blinked, confusion clouding his panic. "What? Solenoid valves?" I repeated, channeling the lecture voice I used to use on junior architects. "If there is a rupture or a sudden drop in pressure, the sensors trip and the main line shuts off automatically at the tank. It is a failsafe. If there was a leak, the gas would already be cut. You physically cannot smell a leak unless you are standing right next to the tank, which is buried 20 yards that way." I pointed toward the front of the house, away from the cliff. "Unless," I added, locking eyes with him, "you are smelling your own fear." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but the technical dismantling of his lie left him speechless. He flushed a deep, angry crimson. He knew that I knew, but he could not admit it without admitting the trap. Maybe I was wrong," he muttered, turning away to hide his face. "Maybe it was just sulfur from the well water." "Probably," I said. "Why don't we have breakfast? I am starving." Half an hour later, we were seated at the heavy oak dining table. Olivia had joined us. She looked as exhausted as Mark, wrapped in a cashmere cardigan that cost more than my first car. She picked at a plate of scrambled eggs, her eyes refusing to meet mine. The silence at the table was thick enough to choke on. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. I was the structural engineer. It was time to apply stress to the test subjects and see where they broke. "Do you remember the day we met Olivia?" I asked suddenly. The sound of her fork scraping against the china stopped. She looked up, startled. "What? The orphanage, I said, leaning back in my chair. St. Jude's. You were 12. You were sitting on that plastic chair in the hallway, clutching a backpack that had a broken strap. You looked so small, so angry at the world. Olivia swallowed hard. Dad, why are you bringing this up now? Because I remember the promise I made you, I continued, ignoring her discomfort. I sat down next to you and I told you that you would never have to worry about where your next meal was coming from. I told you that I would build a life for you that was solid, safe. I told you that as long as I was alive, you would be protected. I looked at Mark, then back to Olivia. I kept that promise, didn't I? Yes, Olivia whispered, her voice trembling. You did. I paid for the private schools, I listed, ticking the items off on my fingers. The pony when you were 14. The car when you were 16. The wedding at the Botanical Gardens that was $80,000 for one afternoon of flowers and champagne. I bought you the house in Buckhead. James, please, Mark interjected, his voice tight. We know you have been generous. We are grateful. Are you? I snapped my gaze, whipping to him. Because gratitude usually does not involve plotting against the benefactor. We are not plotting, Mark protested, but his voice cracked. Then tell me, I said, leaning forward, my elbows on the table. Why, Mark? Why is it never enough? You are a senior engineer at a reputable firm. You make what, $200,000 a year? Olivia has her trust fund allowance. You live in a paid-off house. You have no mortgage, no student loans. Most people in this country would kill for that kind of stability. I let the word kill hang in the air. Where does the money go, Mark? I pressed. Is it gambling, drugs, or are you just trying to fill a hole inside you that has no bottom? Mark slammed his fork down. The noise echoed like a gunshot. You think 200,000 is a lot, Mark shouted, his face contorting with a sudden explosive rage. In our circle, it is poverty, James. We are drowning. The club memberships, the vacations, the cars, it all costs money to maintain the image. And I tried. I tried to invest. I tried to multiply what we had. Crypto, I guessed. High-risk derivatives. Everything, Mark yelled, standing up. He began to pace the room, his hands shaking. I leveraged the house. I took out loans. I thought I could make it back before anyone noticed. But the market tanked. And then I went to the guys in Vegas because I thought I could win it back at the tables. The system is rigged, James. So you owe money to a casino? I asked. Mark stopped pacing. He turned to me, his eyes wild with terror. Not a casino, he hissed. Sharks. The kind of people who do not file lawsuits. I owe them $2 million, James. $2 million. And the interest accumulates at 10% a week. They told me if I do not have the principal by Friday, they are going to take it out in flesh. They sent me a picture of my own hand, James, with the fingers crossed out in red marker. The truth poured out of him like sewage from a burst pipe. It was ugly, raw, and pathetic. I looked at Olivia. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. And you knew? I asked her softly. She nodded, sobbing. He told me 3 months ago, when they started threatening us. So instead of coming to me, I said, my voice cold, instead of asking your father for help, you decided to cash in my life insurance. We didn't have a choice, Olivia wailed. You would have been so disappointed. You would have lectured us about responsibility. You would have cut us off. Disappointed. I laughed, a harsh bark-like sound. You were afraid of a lecture, so you chose patricide. That is your logic. It is too much money, Dad, Olivia screamed, finding a twisted courage in her defensiveness. You have $20 million sitting in accounts doing nothing. You drive a 10-year-old truck. You wear the same coats. You don't spend it. It is just numbers on a screen to you. But it could save our lives. It is not fair that you hoard it while we are living in terror. I stared at her. The entitlement was breathtaking. It was a structural flaw so deep in her character that no amount of reinforcement could ever fix it. She honestly believed that my death was a reasonable exchange for her comfort. She viewed my assets as her property that I was inconveniently holding hostage by being alive. "So that is it," I said quietly. "I am just an obstacle, a vault that needs to be cracked open." I tapped the side of my head, right above where the recording device was taping every word. "So you decided to kill me," I stated flatly. "You put poison in my water at the airport. You tried to come through my window last night." "No," Mark shouted, panic flaring again as he realized how far he had gone. "No, James. Stop saying that word. We are not killers." "Then what are you?" I demanded. "What do you call people who feed potassium chloride to a man with a heart condition?" "It was supposed to be painless," Olivia blurted out. Just like going to sleep." "A heart attack. The doctor said your heart was weak anyway. It was just speeding up nature. You would not have felt a thing, Dad. We wanted it to be peaceful." There it was, the confession. It wasn't a direct "I want to murder you," but it was an admission of the act. It was supposed to be painless, just speeding up nature. I felt a vibration in my shoe, a single, long pulse. Agent Miller had heard. The signal had punched through the storm. They had the audio. I sat there looking at the two people I had loved more than anything in the world. I looked at the little girl I had carried on my shoulders. I looked at the young man I had welcomed into my home. And I saw them for what they truly were: parasites. They had eaten away at my love until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, and now they were angry that the shell was taking too long to crumble. "You have gone too far," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You cannot walk this back, Mark. You cannot unsay that." Mark slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I know," he moaned. "I know. But we are desperate, James. You do not understand what fear does to a person." "I do," I said, standing up slowly. I gripped my walking stick. "I understand fear perfectly. I felt it when that agent grabbed me at the airport. I felt it when I saw you swap those pills. But fear did not make me try to kill you. Fear made me see the truth." "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked, wiping her eyes. Her voice was small, fearful. "Are you going to call the police?" "There is no signal, remember," I reminded her. "We are cut off. Just us family." I walked toward the hallway. "I am going to get dressed," I said. "And then, Mark, since you are so desperate to fix things, I will give you one last chance to show me you are a man." "What do you mean?" Mark looked up, a glimmer of pathetic hope in his eyes. "We are going for a walk," I said. "To the Eagle's Nest lookout. If you want that money, Mark, you are going to have to look me in the eye and earn it. No more pills. No more tricks with gas pipes. Just you, me, and the edge of the world." It was a bait, a challenge. I knew they would take it. They had confessed, but they still needed a body, and I needed them to make one final, undeniable move while the FBI watched from the tree line. "Get your coats," I said. "It is time to end this." The afternoon sun began its descent behind the jagged spine of the Rockies, casting long, bruised shadows across the snowfields. Inside the lodge, the air had become unbreathable. It was not a lack of oxygen, but an excess of tension. We were three people, trapped in a glass cage, circling each other with the unspoken knowledge that only two of us at most would be leaving. At 4 o'clock, Mark stood up from the sofa, where he had been staring blankly at a dead television screen. He zipped up his designer parka, the nylon, swishing with a sound that seemed disproportionately loud in the silent room. "The sun is setting," Mark announced. His voice was tight, brittle. "The light will be perfect at Eagle's Nest. We should go now if we want to get that photo." "A photo," I repeated, looking up from the book I had been pretending to read for the last 2 hours. "You want to take a family portrait now?" "It is a tradition, isn't it?" Mark forced a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. His eyes were dead flat things. "Besides, you said you wanted to walk. You said you wanted to clear the air. It is only a 15-minute hike up the ridge. The view is to die for." The phrasing was clumsy, almost comical in its morbidity. He was not even trying to hide the subtext anymore. "Fine," I said, closing the book. "Let's go." I stood up and walked to the entryway. As I bent down to tie my boots, I performed a specific sequence of movements. I tapped my left heel against the floorboards 3 times in rapid succession. It was the activation signal Agent Miller had drilled into me. The pressure sensor in the insole of my shoe would now switch from passive tracking to active emergency broadcasting. It was sending a distress flare to the satellites orbiting miles above us, screaming my location with meter-perfect precision. "Are you coming, Olivia?" I asked. Olivia was standing by the fireplace, wrapping a thick wool scarf around her neck. She looked pale, her movements sluggish like a swimmer moving through molasses. I don't know," she stammered. "You have to come," Mark snapped. "We need someone to take the picture." He needed a witness. Or perhaps he needed an accomplice to share the guilt, so he wouldn't have to carry the weight of the sin alone. We stepped out into the biting cold. The wind had picked up again, swirling the loose powder into stinging clouds of ice crystals. The temperature was dropping fast, likely hovering around 10 degrees below zero. "I will lead," I said. "I know the trail markers." "No," Mark interjected quickly. "I will follow. You go ahead, James. Olivia in the middle." The formation of an execution. The victim in the front, the distraction in the center, and the executioner in the rear. We began the ascent. The path to Eagle's Nest was narrow, a winding ribbon of treacherous terrain cut into the side of the mountain. To our left was a steep slope. Rising into the tree line to our right, the ground fell away into a deep, snow-filled ravine. I walked with the deliberate, calculated rhythm of a man who understands friction coefficients. I kept my knees bent, lowering my center of gravity. I placed my feet on the patches of snow that looked dull and compacted the snow that had been compressed by wind and previous hikers. This was the snow that held. Behind me, I heard Mark slipping. He was wearing high-end Italian leather boots. They were beautiful, expensive, and completely useless on ice. I heard the scuff of leather on rock, the sharp intake of breath as he lost traction, the frantic scrabbling to stay upright. "Damn it," Mark cursed. "This ice is everywhere." "It is all about surface area and pressure, Mark," I called back over my shoulder, my voice carried away by the wind. "You are putting your weight on your heels. You need to use the balls of your feet. You need to respect the terrain, or it will punish you." He did not answer. We climbed higher. The air grew thinner, cleaner. My lungs burned with the cold, but my mind was crystalline sharp. I was analyzing every step, every rock, every potential weapon in the landscape. We reached the plateau of Eagle's Nest 20 minutes later. It was a spectacular and terrifying piece of geography. A granite shelf jutted out from the mountainside, suspended over a vertical drop of nearly 300 meters. The wind here was ferocious, howling up from the valley floor like a banshee. It whipped my coat around my legs and stung my eyes. Below us, the world fell away into a dizzying white void. Pine trees looked like toothpicks. The river at the bottom of the canyon was a frozen silver vein. "Okay," Mark shouted over the roar of the wind. "This is it. This is the spot." He moved to my left, flanking me. Olivia stood back near the trail entrance, shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. She was looking at the ground, refusing to look at the edge, refusing to look at me. "Go stand over there, James," Mark directed, pointing toward the very tip of the granite shelf. "The light is hitting that peak perfectly. I want to get you with the valley in the background." I looked at the spot he was pointing to. It was a patch of slick, wind-polished ice, sloping gently downward toward the abyss. There was no railing, no barrier, just gravity and a 3-second fall to oblivion. "It looks slippery," I yelled back. "It is fine," Mark insisted, stepping closer. "Just be careful. Go on. It is for the memory." I walked toward the edge, but I did not go to the ice patch. Instead, I stopped about 2 meters from the precipice, right next to a gnarled ancient ponderosa pine that was growing out of a crack in the rock. Its roots were thick, twisted cables of wood that had anchored it against centuries of storms. I grabbed a low-hanging branch with my left hand. It was solid as iron. I wrapped my fingers around the rough bark, feeling the sap sticky against my glove. This was my anchor, my structural redundancy. "This is good right here," I said, planting my feet wide. "No, it is not," Mark shouted, frustration bleeding into his voice. He pulled his phone out, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the gap between me and the edge. "You are blocking the view with that tree. You need to move left. Move out onto the point." "I am comfortable here, Mark," I shouted back. He shoved the phone into his pocket. He took a step toward me, then another. His face was contorted, his teeth bared against the wind. The mask of the polite son-in-law had finally been blown away by the gale, revealing the desperate cornered animal underneath. "Just move, James," he screamed. "Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Just take the damn step." He was 5 feet away, then 4. "Olivia," Mark yelled without looking back. "Get over here, help me position him." Olivia did not move. She sank to her knees in the snow, burying her face in her gloved hands. She was done. She could not participate in the final act. Mark realized he was alone. He looked at me, and I saw the decision form in his eyes. He didn't need a photo. He needed a push. A single violent shove was all it would take to solve his $2 million problem. He lunged. It wasn't a run. It was a stumble forward on the slick rock, his hands outstretched, aiming for my chest. "Mark, stop!" I barked my voice, cutting through the wind with the authority of a site foreman, halting a crane. He froze. Not because I shouted, but because of what I said next. "I know about the pills, Mark." He stopped dead in his tracks 3 feet from me. His hands were still raised in the pushing motion, suspended in the air, like a mime. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. "What?" he whispered. The wind stole the word, but I read it on his lips. "The potassium chloride," I said, speaking clearly and deliberately, ensuring every syllable was captured by the sensor behind my ear. "I know you swapped my beta blockers at the airport. I know you put lethal poison in my medicine bottle. And I know I did not take it." Mark lowered his hands slowly. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His brain was trying to process the impossibility of the statement. If I knew, why was I here? If I knew, why was I alive? "You." He choked out. "You didn't take them." "I swapped them back," I said. "Sugar pills. I watched you sweat on the plane waiting for me to die. It was a pathetic performance, Mark." He stared at me. The shock was rapidly being replaced by a terrifying clarity. The ambiguity was gone. The pretense of the accident was gone. There was no more gas leak, no more bad heart. There was just the truth. He was a murderer who had failed, and I was the witness who could send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. He looked at the drop behind me. Then he looked at me. "You know," Mark said, his voice changing. It became calm, eerily calm. "You know everything." "I know about the debt," I continued, tightening my grip on the tree branch. $2 million to the cartel in Las Vegas. I know they threatened to cut off your fingers. I know you are drowning Mark. And I know you dragged my daughter into the deep end with you. Mark let out a short, hysterical laugh. He shook his head, looking down at his expensive, useless boots. "Well," he said, looking back up at me with dead eyes. "That simplifies things, doesn't it?" He took a step closer. He was no longer trying to trick me onto the ice. He was preparing for violence. "If you know," Mark said, raising his voice over the howling wind, "then I can't let you walk back down this mountain. You understand that, right, James? It is you or me, and I am not going to let them chop me up into pieces." Think about the load path, Mark, I warned him, bracing my legs. You are on slippery ground. I am anchored. If you come at me, you are going to slip. Physics is not on your side. Screw physics, Mark screamed. I am younger than you. I am stronger than you. And you are just a sad old man who should have died yesterday. Don't do it, I said. This is a structural failure you cannot come back from. It is already broken, Mark roared. He threw his gloves onto the snow. He wanted a grip. He wanted to feel the fabric of my coat as he threw me into the abyss. Good, Mark hissed. No more pretending. No more dad. No more family, just gravity. He crouched low, preparing to spring. I looked at him, and for a split second, I didn't see a killer. I saw the man who had toasted me at Christmas. I saw the man who had held Olivia's hand. I saw the potential that had been wasted, corrupted by greed and fear, until it rotted away. Come on then, I said, shifting my weight to my back foot, readying the walking stick that was hidden behind the leg of the pine tree. Let's see if your foundation holds. Mark roared a primal animalistic sound and launched himself across the ice. Mark hit me with the force of a freight train. He was 35 in his prime, fueled by the manic strength of desperation. I was 65 with a bad heart and aching joints. In a fair fight, the physics were entirely in his favor. Mass times acceleration equals force, and he had both in abundance. But I had friction, and I had leverage. As Mark lunged, aiming to slam his shoulder into my chest and propel me backward into the void, I didn't step back. Stepping back would have put my heel on the ice. Instead, I stepped sideways, pivoting on my left foot, which was wedged firmly against the exposed root of the ponderosa pine. It was a move I had learned 40 years ago in a self-defense class for site inspectors working in rough neighborhoods. Redirect the energy, don't absorb it. Mark's momentum carried him forward into empty air where my chest had been a split second before. His eyes went wide as he realized his target was gone. He grasped at my coat, his fingers snagging the wool, but his feet were already sliding on the slick granite. I brought my right arm down hard. I chopped at his outstretched arm, breaking his grip. Gravity always wins, Mark, I shouted. He stumbled, his boots scrabbling uselessly against the ice. He fell forward, his chest slamming onto the rock, just inches from the edge. His head hung over the precipice, staring down 300 meters into the white abyss. He screamed a high, thin sound of pure terror. He scrambled back, clawing at the snow, hyperventilating. He looked up at me, his face a mask of snow and fury. The fall hadn't sobered him. It had enraged him. He was humiliated. He was a predator who had just been outmaneuvered by his prey. "You old son of a bitch!" Mark roared, scrambling to his feet. He was shaky, but he was furious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife. It wasn't big, probably a utility blade for cutting rope, but the steel glinted cold and deadly in the fading light. "Olivia," Mark screamed, not looking away from me. "Olivia, help me, he is fighting back." I looked past him, toward the trail. Olivia was still on her knees, sobbing. "Olivia, stay back," I commanded. "Stay out of this." "Do not listen to him," Mark yelled. "If he walks away, we are dead. The cartel live. Remember the cartel. They will flay us alive. Get over here and help me finish this." I saw Olivia move. She stood up slowly. Her face was streaked with mascara and tears, a tragic mask of indecision. She looked at Mark, desperate and terrified. Then she looked at me. I waited for her to run away. I waited for her to scream for help. I waited for the daughter I had raised to emerge from the shell of the panicked woman. But the daughter didn't come. The accomplice did. Olivia bent down. Her gloved hands dug into the snowbank beside the trail. When she stood up, she wasn't holding a phone. She was holding a jagged chunk of granite the size of a grapefruit. It was heavy, lethal, and crude. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered. The wind carried the words to me, sharp as ice shards. "I am so sorry. "But we can't lose everything," she charged. It broke me. Not physically, not yet, but structurally. The heart I had been worried about protecting from potassium chloride shattered right then and there. Seeing my little girl, the one I had taught to ride a bike, running toward me, with a rock raised high above her head to bash my skull in. It was a collapse of the soul. "Livy, no!" I pleaded, raising my hands. She didn't stop. She was screaming now, a primal wail of guilt and determination. She swung the rock. I couldn't hit her. Even now, with my life on the line, I couldn't strike my child. I instinctively raised my heavy wooden walking stick to block the blow. Crack. The rock slammed into the hickory wood of the stick. The force was immense. The shockwave traveled up my arm, numbing my fingers instantly. The stick splintered but held. Olivia stumbled back from the impact, dropping the rock. She fell into the snow, sobbing hysterically. But the distraction had cost me. Mark seized the moment. While I was focused on Olivia, he tackled me from the side. This time I couldn't pivot. We went down hard. My head slammed against the frozen ground and stars exploded in my vision. The world spun, dizzily white snow-gray sky, Mark's contorted face all blurring together. The knife was gone, lost in the scuffle, but Mark didn't need it. He straddled my chest, pinning my arms with his knees. His weight was crushing. He clamped his hands around my throat. "Die!" Mark screamed, spittle flying onto my face. "Just die, you stubborn old bastard, die so we can live." His thumbs dug into my windpipe. The pressure was excruciating. I tried to buck him off, but I was exhausted, battered and heartsick. The edges of my vision began to darken. The gray sky above me started to fade to black. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I could only look up at him. I saw the madness in his eyes. I saw the absolute absence of humanity. I looked past him, up at the indifferent sky. I thought of Martha. I thought of the day we brought Olivia home. We promised to protect her, I thought. I failed Martha. I didn't protect her from herself. I let her become this. "I am sorry," I gasped, the words dying in my crushed throat. My hands scrabbled uselessly at Mark's coat. The strength was leaving my body. The cold was seeping in, replacing the pain with a numb, peaceful drift. This was it. The structure was coming down. Bang. The sound was not a crack of thunder. It was sharp, percussive, and unmistakably man-made. A gunshot. Mark flinched violently. He looked up confused. Bang. Another shot ripped through the air, echoing off the canyon walls. "Federal agents," a voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone. "Drop the weapon. Get off him now." Mark froze. He looked toward the tree line. From the white camouflage of the forest, figures emerged. They were like ghosts, dressed in white tactical snow gear, moving with terrifying speed on skis and snowshoes. They were not hikers. They were a phalanx of armed professionals. Agent Miller was in the lead. He wasn't wearing a suit now. He was in full tactical gear, an assault rifle raised to his shoulder, the red dot of the laser sight dancing on Mark's chest. "I said get off him," Miller roared, "or I will drop you right here." Mark scrambled off me, as if I were suddenly on fire. He threw his hands up, stumbling backward toward the cliff edge. "Don't shoot!" Mark screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "It was self-defense. He attacked us. He is crazy." I rolled onto my side, gasping for air. The oxygen rushed back into my lungs, burning like fire. I coughed, retching, clutching my bruised throat. "Secure the female!" Miller barked into his headset. 2 agents swarmed Olivia. She didn't fight. She just curled into a ball in the snow, weeping. They pulled her up efficiently, zip-tying her hands behind her back. "Mark Sullivan!" Miller shouted, advancing on him. "Get on your knees, hands behind your head, do it now!" Mark looked at the agents, then at the cliff edge, then back at the agents. For a second I thought he might jump. He looked at the drop with a longing that was terrifying. It was the only exit left. "Don't do it, Mark," I rasped, forcing myself to sit up. My voice was a wrecked croak. "Don't take the easy way out. You owe me." Mark looked at me. He saw the bruises forming on my neck, his handiwork. He slumped. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He sank to his knees in the snow, lacing his fingers behind his head. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am sorry." Miller reached him. He kicked Mark's legs apart and cuffed him with practiced efficiency. He hauled Mark to his feet. "Mark Sullivan, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of James Smith, conspiracy to commit murder and wire fraud." Miller recited, his voice flat and professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Miller then walked over to me. He holstered his weapon and offered me a hand. His grip was firm, warm. "You okay, James?" he asked, looking at my neck with concern. That got a little close at the end there. I took his hand and pulled myself up. My legs were shaky, but I stood. I brushed the snow off my coat. I adjusted my scarf to hide the marks. "I am fine," I said, my voice hoarse. Structure held. I looked at Olivia. An agent was leading her away. She looked back at me, her eyes pleading. "Dad," she whispered. "Daddy, please." I looked at her. I didn't see the little girl anymore. I saw a stranger who had tried to bash my head in with a rock. "Take them away," I said to Miller. I turned my back on them and looked out at the valley. The sun had finally set. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a twilight sky. It was cold. It was empty, but it was solid. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I stood. The adrenaline that had sustained me on the precipice evaporated the moment Agent Miller clicked the handcuffs onto Mark's wrists. In its place, a crushing leaden fatigue settled into my marrow. I watched as two agents hauled Mark out of the snow. He was weeping, his face buried in the drift. His expensive coat ruined his dignity, shredded. A few yards away, Olivia was on her knees screaming my name, her voice tearing through the thin mountain air like a wounded animal. "Dad, please tell them to stop. I did not mean to hurt you." I tried to turn away, but my body betrayed me. My knees buckled. Agent Miller was there instantly, his hand gripping my elbow, steadying me with a firmness that was the exact opposite of the violent shove my son-in-law had attempted moments ago. "I have got you, James," Miller said, his voice low and grounding. "Breathe. It is over." I coughed a wet hacking sound that sent spikes of agony through my bruised larynx. I touched my throat. It felt swollen, tender, the imprint of Mark's thumbs, already rising in angry purple welts. I looked at the two people being dragged toward the waiting snowmobiles. I felt no triumph. I felt no righteous anger. I felt only a vast, echoing hollowness, as if the core of my being had been scooped out, leaving only the structural shell standing. The journey down the mountain was a blur of blue lights and the roar of engines. I sat on the back of a snowmobile, wrapped in a thermal blanket, watching the dark trees blur past. It felt like a funeral procession. In a way it was. The family I thought I had was dead. The people sitting in the back of the transport van ahead of me were strangers who just happened to wear the faces of my memories. We arrived at the local precinct in Aspen an hour later. It was a small, sturdy building made of stone and timber, designed to look like a chalet, but fortified like a bunker. They led me to a private room, gave me hot coffee, and had a paramedic examine my neck. "Soft tissue damage," the medic said, packing ice around my throat. "You are lucky, sir." Another 10 seconds of pressure and he would have crushed the trachea. I nodded silently. 10 seconds. The difference between a witness and a corpse. 30 minutes later, Agent Miller opened the door. "They are in the holding rooms, separate cells. We let them sit for a bit. The panic has set in. Do you want to do this? You do not have to see them, James. We can handle the arraignment without you." "I need to finish it," I rasped. My voice sounded like grinding gravel. "I need to close the file." Miller nodded and led me down a sterile hallway. We entered an observation room with a one-way mirror, looking into interview room 1. Mark was there. He was pacing like a caged wolf, his hands cuffed to the table. Then we moved to interview room 2. Olivia was slumped over the metal table, her head in her arms, her shoulders shaking. "Bring them together," I said. Miller raised an eyebrow. "Together, that is usually volatile." "I want them to see me," I said. "Both of them. At the same time. I want to see if the foundation holds when they are forced to look at the wreck they caused." Miller spoke into his radio. A few minutes later, I was seated at a long metal table in a larger conference room. A guard stood at the door. Miller stood behind me. The door opened and Mark and Olivia were shuffled in their hands, cuffed in front of them, their ankles shackled. They looked terrible. The arrogance of the first-class flight, the entitlement of the lodge, the rage on the cliff, it was all gone. They looked small. They looked like children who had broken a priceless vase and were waiting for the belt. They sat opposite me. For a long moment the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rattle of chains as they adjusted their positions. Then the dam broke. "He made me do it!" Olivia blurted out, her voice shrill and desperate. She turned on Mark with a venom I had never seen. "Tell him, Mark. Tell him it was your idea. You are the one who owes the money. You are the one who swapped the pills." Mark's head snapped up, his eyes bulging. "Me. You are the one who tracked his portfolio. You are the one who said he was worth more dead. You told me to push him. Olivia, I saw you. You picked up a rock. You were going to bash his head in." "Because you were failing," Olivia screamed, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to fix your mess. You gambled it all away. $2 million. Mark, you destroyed us." "I was trying to give you the life you wanted," Mark shouted back, leaning as far across the table as his chains would allow. "The house, the cars, the vacations, who asked for those, Olivia? You did. You never asked where the money came from, did you? You just spent it." I watched them. I watched the people I had shared Christmas dinners with, the people I had supported and loved, tearing each other apart like starving rats in a bucket. It was grotesque. It was illuminating. "Enough," I said. The word was quiet, but it silenced the room instantly. They both turned to look at me. The reality of my presence seemed to hit them anew. I was the ghost at the feast. I was the victim who refused to die. "Dad," Olivia whimpered, slipping back into the role of the victim. "Daddy, please. You have to understand. I was scared. I was so scared. Mark got involved with these terrible people. They threatened to hurt me. They said they would kill us both. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. I was just trying to survive." "By killing me," I said flatly. "I was desperate," she sobbed. "I am your daughter. You promised to take care of me. Remember, at the orphanage you promised." She was weaponizing my own love against me. She was using the memory of her rescue to justify her betrayal. It was the final structural failure. The beam had snapped. Mark looked at me, his face pale and sweaty. "James, look, I know this looks bad. But think about the scandal. Think about the family name. If this goes to trial, it will be all over the news. Apex Meridian, your reputation. We can fix this. If you drop the charges, we can work something out. I will go to rehab. I will get help." I reached into my inner jacket pocket. My hand brushed against the bruise on my chest, where Mark had tackled me. I pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. They were still warm from the fax machine in the captain's office. I smoothed the papers out on the metal table. "This," I said, pointing to the document, "is a confirmation of a wire transfer I authorized 30 minutes ago." Mark squinted at the paper. Olivia wiped her eyes, leaning in. "I spoke to my private banker," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "I liquidated a portion of my bond portfolio. It was an emergency withdrawal. The funds were wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, per the instructions Agent Miller found on your encrypted phone, Mark." Mark went still. "What?" $2 million, I said. plus an additional $150,000 for the late fees and interest. The entire debt you owe to the syndicate in Las Vegas. It is paid, in full." The silence that followed was absolute. Mark stared at me, his mouth hanging open. A light kindled in his eyes, a spark of disbelief that rapidly fanned into a blaze of euphoric hope. He looked at Olivia, then back at me. He laughed, a choked, hysterical sound. You paid it," Mark stammered. "You paid the cartel. Every penny," I said. "Oh my God," Olivia breathed, clasping her hands together. "Oh, Daddy, thank you, I knew it. I knew you wouldn't let them hurt us. I knew you loved us." She tried to stand up to reach for me, but the chains held her back. She slumped back into her chair, beaming through her tears. "Thank you, James," Mark said, his shoulders sagging in relief. "Thank you. You have no idea. You saved our lives. We will pay you back. I swear. I will work every day for the rest of my life. We will make this right. We can start over. We can put this whole nightmare behind us." I watched them celebrate. I watched them construct a new reality where everything was forgiven, where money had once again fixed the unfixable. They thought they understood me. They thought I was the same soft, doting old man who wrote checks to make problems go away. They were wrong. "You misunderstand," I said. My tone did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mark's smile faltered. "What?" "I did not pay the debt to save you from consequences," I said, leaning forward. "I paid it to ensure the correct consequences." I tapped the paper with my index finger. "If I had left that debt unpaid," I explained, speaking with the precision of an engineer explaining a collapse, "the cartel would have gotten to you, even in prison. Especially in prison. They have reach. They would have had you shanked in the shower or beaten to death in the yard. Or maybe they would have waited until you were released and then tortured you. It would have been messy. It would have been barbaric." I paused, letting the imagery sink in. "I do not want that," I said. "I do not want you tortured. I do not want you murdered by criminals. That is not justice. That is vengeance. And your mother." I looked at Olivia. "Your mother would not have wanted that." "Exactly." Olivia nodded eagerly, though confusion was creeping back into her eyes. "Mom would want us to be safe." "She would," I agreed. "And now you are safe." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. "You are safe from the cartel," I said. "The debt is gone. No one is coming to break your legs. No one is coming to cut off your fingers." I walked around the table until I was standing right behind Agent Miller. I put my hand on the back of his chair. "But that was a civil matter," I said. "A financial transaction. This." I gestured to the room, to the handcuffs, to the one-way mirror. "This is a criminal matter." "Wait," Mark said, his voice trembling. "But if you paid the debt, why are we still—" "James, you said you wanted to save us." "I did save you," I said. "I saved you for the law." I looked Mark dead in the eye. "I paid $2 million so that you can go to prison for the next 20 years without looking over your shoulder. I paid it so you can serve every single day of your sentence for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder and elder abuse. You are going to prison, Mark. You are going to prison, Olivia. And you are going to go there as debt-free citizens." The hope in Mark's eyes died. It didn't just fade, it was extinguished, leaving behind a darkness that was absolute. He realized the cruelty of my mercy. I had taken away his excuse. I had taken away his boogeyman. I had left him with nothing but his own guilt and 4 concrete walls. "No," Olivia whispered. "No, Dad, you can't. You can't put us in prison. We are family." "We were family," I corrected her. "Now we are just plaintiff and defendants." "You are a monster!" Olivia screamed, lurching against the table. The chains rattled violently. "You are a cruel, hateful old man. How can you do this? How can you spend $2 million just to rot us in jail?" "It is an investment," I said calmly. An investment in my own safety. As long as you are in here, I know exactly where you are. I know you cannot put poison in my drink. I know you cannot push me off a cliff. I turned to Agent Miller. I am done here, Agent. Proceed with the booking. I will be available for the grand jury testimony whenever you need me. Yes, sir, Miller said. He looked at Mark and Olivia with a mixture of disgust and professional indifference. Get them out of here. 2 guards entered the room. Mark didn't fight. He stared at the table catatonic. The reality of 20 years in a federal penitentiary was crashing down on him. Olivia, however, began to scream. She screamed curses. She screamed pleas. She screamed that she hated me. I hate you, she shrieked as the guard hauled her up. I wish you had died. I wish Mark had pushed harder. I stood there watching them drag her away. Her words should have hurt. They should have pierced my heart. But they bounced off. My heart was reinforced now. It was encased in the steel of realization. I waited until the door closed and the screaming faded down the hallway. The silence returned. It was a clean, sterile silence. Miller stood up and gathered the files. That was impressive, Mr. Smith. Expensive but impressive. It was necessary, I said, rubbing my throat. Structure is everything, Agent. If you leave a crack, the water gets in, freezes, and breaks the whole thing apart. I just sealed the crack. You know they will be eligible for parole in maybe 15 years, Miller noted. I will be 80, I said, if I am still alive. By then I will have spent 15 years living a life free of them. That is worth $2 million. I walked to the door. Mr. Smith, Miller called out. I turned back. You said you did it because it is what your wife would have wanted. Do you really believe that? I thought about Martha. I thought about her gentle spirit, her capacity for forgiveness. But I also thought about her fierce protectiveness. She had warned me about Mark. She had seen the danger. Martha believed in redemption, I said softly. But she also believed in gravity. You cannot save someone who insists on jumping. I walked out of the interrogation room and into the precinct lobby. Through the front windows, I could see the snow falling again, soft and white, covering the tracks we had made on the mountain, covering the blood, covering the scars on the land. It was a fresh start. A cold, hard, beautiful fresh start. I zipped up my coat and stepped out into the night. It has been 6 months since I walked out of the Aspen Police Precinct into the snowy night. 6 months since I watched my family disintegrate under the weight of their own greed. Today, I stood on the pedestrian walkway of the newly inaugurated Summit Span Bridge, a suspension marvel connecting 2 ridges in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had come out of retirement to consult on the final load-bearing tests. The wind up here was fierce, whipping against the steel cables that hummed with tension, but the bridge did not sway. It flexed. It adapted. It held. I ran my hand along the cold, galvanized steel of the railing. This is what I understand. Steel, concrete, physics, materials that do exactly what they are designed to do. If a cable snaps, it is because of physics, not malice. If a bolt shears it, it is because of fatigue, not betrayal. Structures are honest in a way that people never are. I walked back toward the visitor center on the north side of the span. A large LED screen mounted on the wall was broadcasting the midday news. I stopped my breath, misting in the cool autumn air. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen in bold red letters. Sentencing handed down in high-profile Aspen Cliff case. I watched as the anchorwoman read the report. Her voice was professional, detached. Mark Sullivan and Olivia Sullivan were sentenced today in federal court to 25 years each for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and multiple counts of wire fraud. The judge cited the cold-blooded and calculated nature of the crime, particularly the exploitation of the victim's medical condition. The defense's plea for leniency based on financial duress was categorically rejected. The screen flashed a file photo of Mark and Olivia being led out of the courthouse. They looked gaunt. Their expensive clothes were gone, replaced by orange jumpsuits. Mark looked defeated, his eyes staring at the ground. Olivia looked angry, her face twisted in a scowl that I recognized from her teenage years, but hardened by a bitterness that would never leave her. 25 years. They would be in their 60s when they walked free. My entire remaining lifespan, and then some, would be spent while they sat in concrete boxes. A younger colleague, a junior engineer named David, walked up beside me holding 2 coffees. He saw what I was watching. He knew the story. Everyone knew the story. "I am sorry, James," David said quietly. "It must be hard seeing that." I took the coffee from him. "Hard?" I asked, tasting the word. "No, David. It is not hard. It is necessary." I looked back at the screen as the news cycle moved on to the weather report. "When we find a compromised support beam in this bridge," I said, gesturing to the massive structure behind us, "we do not feel sorry for it. We do not ask it why it failed. We remove it. We replace it with something that can carry the load. If we leave the bad beam because we are sentimental about it, the whole bridge falls and innocent people die." I simply removed the compromised beams from my life. David nodded, though. I could see the unease in his eyes. He saw a man who had sent his children to prison. I saw a man who had survived a demolition. I returned to my home in Atlanta that evening. The house was quiet. For a long time after Martha died, this silence had felt oppressive, a constant reminder of what I had lost. Now the silence felt clean. It was the silence of safety. I no longer had to wonder if the person making me tea was counting the minutes until I drank it. I no longer had to listen for footsteps in the hallway at 2 in the morning. I walked into my study and unlocked the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. Inside lay a single envelope stamped with the seal of the Federal Correctional Institution. It had arrived 3 days ago. I sat down and picked it up. I had already read it, but I pulled the letter out one last time. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. It was Olivia's. "Dear Dad, I don't know if you will read this. I hope you do. It is cold here. The lights never really turn off. I am scared all the time. I have had a lot of time to think. I know you think I am a monster. Maybe I was. Mark and we got lost. We got so wrapped up in the lifestyle, in the fear of losing it, that we lost ourselves. But I am still your daughter. I am still the girl you saved from St. Jude's. Doesn't that count for anything? Please, Dad. I am not asking for money. I am just asking for a word. Write to me. Visit me. Just let me know that I haven't lost you completely. I am so sorry. I miss Mom. I miss you. Love, Livy." I read the words, "Love, Livy," and felt a phantom pain in my chest, like the ache of an old fracture when it rains. Part of me, the father who had bandaged her scraped knees, wanted to pick up a pen. I wanted to write back. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her, that I would come to visit, that we could try to rebuild something from the ashes. But then, I remembered the weight of the rock in her hand on the cliff edge. I remembered the look in her eyes when she charged at me. It wasn't the look of a lost child. It was the look of a stranger who had decided I was an obstacle to be removed. Forgiveness is a virtue, but forgetting is a structural flaw. If I let her back in even just a little, I would be introducing a stress fracture back into my foundation. She did not miss me. She missed the safety I provided. She missed the shield. I folded the letter slowly, aligning the edges with precision. I placed it back in the envelope. I did not tear it up. I did not burn it. I simply placed it back in the drawer and locked it. I would not write back. I would not visit. My silence was not a punishment, it was a boundary. It was a reinforced concrete wall that said, "You cannot hurt me anymore." The next morning, I drove to a community center in downtown Atlanta. I walked into a conference room where 12 people were sitting in a circle. They were all like me, older, successful, with silver hair and tired eyes. This was the first meeting of the Silver Shield Foundation, a non-profit I had established with a portion of the money Mark had tried to kill me for. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat at the head of the circle. "My name is James Smith." "Good morning, James," the group chorused. "I am a structural engineer," I began. "And 6 months ago, my daughter and son-in-law tried to murder me for my estate." There were nods of understanding around the room. The woman to my left, a retired surgeon named Sarah, touched my arm. Her son had forged her signature to mortgage her house. The man across from me, a veteran named Robert, had lost his life savings to a grandson who claimed he needed money for surgery that never happened. We were a club of the betrayed. "We are here," I continued, "not just to share our stories, but to protect ourselves. We spent our lives building wealth, building legacies. But we made a critical error in our designs. We taught our children how to succeed. We sent them to the best schools. We gave them down payments. We taught them the value of a dollar." I paused, looking around the room. "But we forgot to teach them how to be poor," I said. "We forgot to teach them that character is what you have left when the money runs out. We shielded them from struggle, so when the struggle finally found them, they didn't know how to cope. They didn't know how to work their way out of a hole. They only knew how to steal from us. Silver Shield," I explained, "is going to provide legal defense for seniors. We are going to audit suspicious family transfers. We are going to be the inspectors who find the cracks before the house collapses on top of you. We are going to teach you that saying no to your children is sometimes the only way to save them from themselves." The meeting lasted for 2 hours. For the first time in months, I saw hope in the eyes of these people. They realized they weren't just victims, they were survivors. We were reinforcing each other. That evening, I cooked a simple dinner for myself. A steak medium rare and roasted vegetables. I set the table for one. But at the empty seat across from me, I placed a framed photograph of Martha. It was taken in Italy years ago. She was laughing, holding a gelato, the sunlight catching the gold in her hair. I opened a bottle of wine. It was a 1996 Cabernet, the same vintage Mark had broken in his rage at the lodge. I poured a glass for myself, and a small splash into a glass for Martha. I sat down and looked at her picture. "You were right, Martha," I said to the silence. "You warned me. You told me he was hollow. You told me Olivia was drifting." I took a sip of the wine. It was rich, complex, with notes of dark fruit and oak. "I had to make a choice," I told her. "I could have saved them from prison. I could have paid the debt and kept it quiet. We could have pretended to be a family again. But if I had done that, I would have destroyed everything you and I built. They would have come back for more. They would have drained the accounts, sold the house, and eventually they would have succeeded in killing me. And then they would have destroyed themselves with the money." I swirled the wine in the glass. "I protected the legacy, Martha. The foundation money is going to help people. The house is safe." "I am safe. I had to cut them off to save the root." I raised my glass to her photo. "I miss you," I whispered. "But I am still standing." As I ate my dinner in the quiet house, I thought about the concept of self-preservation. In our culture, we are often taught that love means sacrifice. We are told that a parent should give everything for their child, even their own life. And in a physical sense, if a car was coming, I would push Olivia out of the way without thinking. But this was different. This wasn't a car accident. This was a slow, deliberate erosion of my existence. Self-preservation is not selfishness. It is the highest form of responsibility. You are the steward of your own life. You are the caretaker of your own soul. If you allow someone to destroy you, even if that someone is your child, you are failing in your primary duty to existence. You cannot be a source of strength for others if you are broken. You cannot keep someone else warm by setting yourself on fire. Sometimes love looks like a hug. Sometimes love looks like a check. But sometimes the most powerful, necessary form of love looks like a locked door and a 25-year prison sentence. I loved them enough to stop them from becoming murderers who got away with it. I loved them enough to force them to face the one thing they had spent their lives avoiding consequences. I finished my meal and washed the dishes. I dried them and put them away. Order, structure, routine. I put on my coat and walked out onto the back porch. The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. The air was crisp. I walked down the steps and stood in the center of the garden Martha had planted. The oak tree she had loved was shedding its leaves, preparing for winter. It was letting go of what it didn't need, so it could survive the cold and bloom again in the spring. I placed my hand on the trunk of the tree. It was rough, solid, immovable. I am James Smith. I am a structural risk assessor. I look for cracks. And when I found the crack in my own heart, I didn't paint over it. I didn't ignore it. I fixed it. I turned and walked back toward the house, my shadow stretching out long and unbroken behind me. I walked with the steady, rhythmic gait of a man who knows that the ground beneath his feet is solid because he is the one who laid the foundation. Thank you for listening to this story. It was a journey into the darkest corners of family betrayal, but also a testament to the strength it takes to stand up for yourself, even when it breaks your heart. I want to know where you are listening from right now. Are you safe at home? Are you on a night shift? Are you driving? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, have you ever had to cut someone off to save yourself? Let's talk about it. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, Bittersweet Revenge. Hit that like button to support the work, and please press the hype button so this story can reach more people who might need to hear this warning. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, check your foundation.